Welcome back. In the previous two videos, we've talked through how the Core Knowledge Middle School math curriculum works, as well as looked at the pile of files that are available to download from Core Knowledge. And we sorted through those, identified which ones you need to print, which ones you won't need at all. Now, if you haven't watched those first two videos, please do that first and come back and join me. What I'm going to talk about in this video will be a whole lot easier to understand if you've watched those first two videos. All right, so in this video, we're going to take a detailed tour of the teacher's guide. Now, as I mentioned in the previous videos, this math curriculum is divided into units, and there are multiple units for each grade level, and each unit has a teacher's guide, and thankfully, they're all laid out exactly the same. So by the end of this video, my goal is that you'll be comfortable using the teacher's guide, and specifically the resource sections it contains. We'll also spend a bit of time at the end talking about assessments that are included in the curriculum and why it's really important to use them, even if maybe you aren't normally interested in assessing, formally assessing your homeschooled student. Still important to use these ones. I'll explain. All right, in the next video, also the final video, we'll do a detailed walkthrough of an example lesson in a teacher's guide. That video is long, but I will tell you, I took a lot of time to very carefully explain every single part of a lesson because again, thankfully, almost all the lessons have the exact same rhythm and flow. So by working through one together, you'll be in a good position to sit down and use this curriculum each school day. Okay, so let's jump back in and start looking at the teacher's guide. All right, so when you download a unit from the Core Knowledge website, the folder will include a PDF copy of the teacher's guide. And the teacher's guide is the most important part of the math curriculum. All the information about the unit is here, including detailed step-by-step instructions for lessons and the answers to the student worksheets. These are big files, several hundred pages each, and that's because they include such extensive information, which is so useful for using this curriculum to teach your student. Now, just to be clear, all the teaching information is in the teacher's guide. This curriculum is meant to be actively taught to your students, so the student worksheets don't contain any info other than very basic instructions and the problems themselves. All the information they need to learn the lessons of the concepts is here in the teacher's guide. Okay. Now, I don't recommend you print the teacher's guide. I personally love having hard copies of teacher's guides, but these ones are big files, hundreds of pages. They're in color. They're just not terribly economical to print. It's likely at some point in the future, the Core Knowledge website will offer hard copies for sale, which will be a wonderful moment. But at the current moment, we're all going to be relying on these free downloadable files. Okay, so as a practical matter, since printing isn't ideal, you'll be accessing the PDF file for the teacher's guide on a device, such as a tablet or a laptop. Okay, so like I just keep my tablet on the table with the teacher's guide open when I'm teaching, okay? And you'll be able to use that to read through the important info at the beginning of the unit, as well as teach each lesson. All right, let's go ahead and start by taking a look at the table of contents. Thankfully, every teacher's guide for the middle school math curriculum is laid out in the same format. So once you finish this video, you're going to be in a good position to dive into any of the unit teacher guides. All the teacher's guides start with important unit information, which we're going to be going over in the next few slides. You'll want to get in the habit of reviewing this information before the start of the unit. But keep in mind, you won't need all the info that's there. So in the next few slides, I'll be specifically highlighting what information is important to us as homeschoolers, okay? And then next up, the teacher's guide includes lesson plans and student task statements. These are the very detailed step-by-step instructions and the script for presenting the information to your student, okay? Because one of the real strengths of this program is that the depth of the teaching will appeal to people who themselves are good at math, but the level of detailed hand-holding available for every lesson is going to appeal to those of us who math might not be our best subject. Okay, it's really that best of both worlds. And in the next video, which is the last video, we will do a detailed walkthrough of an example lesson. Almost all the lessons are laid out essentially the same way, so I want you to have an opportunity to look at each lesson closely while I guide you through each section. All right. Finally, there is the teacher resources section in the back of this teacher's guide. Now, spoiler alert, these resources in the back of the teacher's guide are the exact same resources located in that unit folder you downloaded from the Core Knowledge website. So these are duplicates of the resources we just looked at in video number 2. And hopefully you've watched that video and you're already up to speed on which resources are useful, which are not useful if you're homeschooling. But it is really nice that they're also conveniently located in the back of the teacher's guide so you can quickly reference what you need. All right, so first up, let's tackle the unit-specific information. So these next few slides are going to walk you through the information in every teacher's guide that you should review prior to starting a new unit. Now, this isn't as burdensome as it sounds. It's typically 10 pages or so, and it's not all that dense. I'd recommend taking 15 minutes the night before maybe, or the weekend before you start a new unit, just to review this information. So the first section of the unit info in the introduction, which contains that unit narrative. And this is really just a preview of what concepts are covered in this new unit and how they relate to what the student should already know, or what they'll learn later in middle school, either in future units in the school year or in the next grade or two. One of the things about this specific curriculum from Core Knowledge is that it's divided into units covering discrete topics. And yes, of course, all math concepts at this level are tied in with other math concepts. This introduction, though, is helpful to us as teachers in that it puts us in a better position to support our students as they transition to this new topic. All right. As part of this section, there's also a portion called Progression of Disciplinary Language. It sounds very important. Okay. But legitimately, an important part of the learning process is the ability to compare, explain, and describe mathematical concepts. This might be a brand new idea to you as a parent, and that's okay. But learning math and learning it well is not just knowing the steps to complete a task or problem. That is important. We should know the steps. But really learning math is also about being able to explain the steps and why each is needed. So one aspect of this curriculum, which makes it such a high quality option, is the direct focus on expanding the student's mathematical vocabulary. In fact, there's even a new terminology table here in the introduction in the teacher's guide, which shows when different concepts and vocabulary are introduced and when a student should be familiar enough with that term to use it correctly when explaining their process or outcomes. So for example, a student might learn a new concept and the associated vocabulary in lesson 4. Like they might learn what the definition of a circle is or something like that. And then they should be reasonably expected to have successfully integrated that new vocabulary knowledge into their work by lesson 8. Because ultimately, having a well-developed mathematical vocabulary not only assists our cognitive processes, but it also allows us to communicate accurately with others. All right, next up, in this first portion of the teacher's guide is the unit learning targets. And I'll tell you up front that this is the sort of section many homeschooling parents might gloss right over, but I'm going to encourage you to look at it before you start the unit and refer back to it regularly. This unit learning target list is found both here in the introduction portion of the unit, teacher's guide, but it's also available in a separate file in the teacher resources subfolder that you've downloaded from Core Knowledge. This is a really quick reference list of what students should be able to do at the end of each lesson. So for example, for the second unit of 6th grade, which covers ratios, some of the unit learning targets are things like, I know how to say words and numbers in order to accurately describe a ratio. So putting those words and numbers in the correct order. Okay. If I have a ratio, I can create a new ratio that is equivalent. Okay. So 2 things that your students should be able to do at a certain point. All right. Now the lessons in this curriculum area, are really well structured. Okay. And each lesson includes the specific learning targets. So you don't need to get too wrapped up in this list, but I would encourage you to refer back to it regularly and double check with your student that they're retaining these key concepts. All right, next, each teacher's guide has a list of required materials for that unit, and this tends to be a mix of standard school supplies, standard math manipulatives, and some stuff for demonstrations, like household items, basic science equipment. Now, before I get into specifics, keep in mind that this supply list is going to exist in several places. First, it's always here in the front of the teacher's guide. Second, each lesson will list the supplies needed for that specific lesson. And finally, because my goal is to make this curriculum as easy as possible for homeschoolers to use, I've dug through all the units and put together an organization guide that lists supplies you'll need throughout the school year and a unit-specific prep checklist that breaks out what supplies are needed in each unit as well as each lesson. Okay, so don't panic. While you need to gather the supplies, it will be very clear what is needed. Okay, so let's take a few minutes and tackle each of these supply groups individually. First, there are those basic school supplies for middle school, such as rulers, tracing paper, compass, protractor, that sort of thing. Nothing too exciting there. And now, as I mentioned in my first video, this is a very hands-on math curriculum. It relies pretty heavily on physical manipulatives, such as snap cubes, tangrams, that sort of thing. This allows students to physically interact with the numbers and get that deeper understanding of how the numbers relate to each other and the how and why behind the concepts they're learning. Now, the good news here is that unlike the other hands-on math curriculums, which shall remain nameless, not only is the core knowledge curriculum free, but the manipulatives you'll need to use are the kind that you can just buy online, like on Amazon or somewhere like that. None of this is proprietary. All these items are also pretty inexpensive, which is great. All right, now what sets this curriculum apart, though, is that there is significant focus on helping students not only deeply understand the concepts, but also relate these concepts to the real world. Now, when I first started trying to get all these resources pulled together, I spent hours and hours poring over the teacher's guides and the resource files, all the resource files for these courses, because I wanted to make sense of it all before I tried to explain it to you. And when I was finished, I was having a conversation with some highly experienced homeschooling friends who I just greatly admire and respect. And I was telling them, I really am thinking of this. This is what we would normally think of as a high quality hands-on math curriculum, complete with all these manipulatives, but with this heavy dose of what we would normally associate with an excellent science curriculum, those demonstrations that really bring the concepts to life. And also I told them, I just really wish I had taken this class as a middle school student because it would have been really fun. Now, the demonstrations built into this curriculum are periodic. They don't happen every day. And when they are scheduled into a lesson, it's clearly laid out in the lesson plan, so there's no guesswork involved. Also, the demonstrations typically use standard household or grocery items, occasionally a science item like a beaker. Remember the beakers? Let's go back to middle school. Now, things like a beaker, you'll likely have around at this point in your life anyway for homeschool. If you're homeschooling middle school science, this is just kind of a standard thing you end up needing. If not, though, let me tell you, you will not be the first homeschooling parent who has substituted a glass jar or something. It's fine. We do this all the time. All right. So whether you use this required materials list or the one in the resources I have for you to download on the blog, please just be sure to look through this at the beginning of each unit and get the items collected so your school days will run smoothly. Nothing gets you off the rails faster than getting up to find something and having your student wander off. Let me tell you from experience. Okay. All right. So that concludes the introduction portion of the teacher's guide for the unit. And again, you'll want to read through those 10 pages or so before you start the unit. Now, the next portion of the teacher's guide is the lesson plans and student task statements. This is the portion you will be using every day to teach your student. And as you can see from the table of contents, the unit is divided into sections. So this unit is focused on introducing ratios, and it's divided into 5 sections. Section 1 covers lessons 1 and 2 and focuses on what are ratios. Section 2 covers lessons 3 to 5 and focuses on equivalent ratios. And then section 3 covers lessons 6 through 10 and focuses on representing equivalent ratios and so on. Okay, almost all the lessons are laid out in the same manner, thankfully. And we'll take a brief look at that on the next slide. Now, as I was going through the units, though, I did notice that sometimes the final lesson involves a problem or a project that the student will work through to cement the concepts learned in the lesson. It's a fun way to finish a unit, but the lesson might be laid out a bit differently since there's like one task being accomplished for that entire lesson for the school day. So just a note, I'd recommend looking at the final lesson in advance when you're still fairly early in the unit to just kind of mentally prep for what that's going to look like. Now, I think one of the most helpful things in learning to use this curriculum smoothly is to carefully work through an example lesson. And I'm going to do that with you in the next video. But for this video, we're just going to do a little more high level since this is more a tour of the teacher's guide in general. And so let's take a high level look at a lesson, including the main sections and some resources that are built in that you may or may not need to use. All right. Each lesson is broken up into several parts, including a warm-up, a primary lesson, a section where, and then a section where the student will practice applying what was learned with you right there with them, and then a cool down, okay, kind of a conclusion. After the lesson is completed, so all those sections are done, the student then works independently on the practice problems in the student workbook. And then last, but still very important, you would correct your students' work so they could rework any problems they got wrong. And this whole process boils down to about 45 minutes to an hour each day. Now, as I broke it out in the first video, typically I'd plan to spend 5 minutes reviewing the lesson before you start teaching your student, 20 to 25 minutes directly working through those sections in the lesson. The student is then likely to need 15 to 25 minutes to work independently. And after that, you'll want to take a few minutes to review their work and have them correct any mistakes. And as I said in the first video, these times I'm kind of giving you roughly, assume that you've been teaching for a few weeks and you've gotten real good at using the curriculum, okay? Might take you a little bit longer the first few days and weeks as you kind of get your feet wet and get into the rhythm and flow of each lesson. All right, now I do want to quickly point out there are a few resources that appear within lessons. The first are the alignments, is the alignment section. It's at the beginning of the lesson. And we will look at this more closely in video 4, where we go page by page and section by section through an example lesson. But at a high level right now, this alignment section is providing common core alignment information to teachers who are required to align their lessons. As a homeschooler, you can almost certainly ignore this section, okay? Next, many lessons include additional support information for students with disabilities, and you'll see these as you're working through the lesson. There's also a similar type of section to support ELL students, that's English language learners. One of the great things about homeschooling is that we are able to adjust our lessons to meet our individual students' needs. So if either of these sections is helpful to your specific situation, please know that they are there and built into the lessons. All right, so I mentioned at the beginning of the video that the back of the teacher's guide includes a section of teacher resources. Now, all of the resources in the back there are duplicates of that teacher resources file folder that you downloaded with the unit files from Core Knowledge. And we walk through the various resources in video number 2, but I do want to take a few minutes before we go to talk specifically about assessments. As you can see here on the table of contents, both the assessments and answer keys for the assessments are located in the back of the teacher's guide, but they are also in separate files in that teacher resources folder. So when you go to print them, it's a little bit easier just to open the separate file and do that. All right, so let's talk about the assessments and how they're built into this curriculum. So first, before we get into this, please know that it's really important to take time to do these assessments. I'm going to harp on this a little bit. I realize that many homeschoolers will often skip tests or assessments built into a curriculum. Okay, I get it. I've done it myself. In this specific case, for this specific curriculum, it's not a good idea to skip them. Now, as I mentioned in the first video, this curriculum has less daily practice than a lot of other math curriculums out there. That can work fine, but it's important to understand that practice is built into this curriculum with the understanding that you'll have these assessment days, right, where you're basically pausing and practicing the concepts. All right, so yes, assessments are primarily meant to allow you a chance to ensure your student is retaining concepts, and that is important, not to downplay that at all. But even if that's not a concern in your case, even if you feel like you have a really good grasp of where your child is at, these assessment sheets do provide really important pausing point to stop and practice what was learned. Okay, and there are 3 types of assessments built into this curriculum. All units start with an assessment to check your students' readiness, okay? Readiness for what is going to be taught in the unit. Now, there are 2 parts. There's a part A and a part B, basically 2 separate sets of worksheets. And if you use the daily schedule I have available for you to download on my website, I've scheduled 1 day for the part A assessment, 1 day for the part B assessment. Realistically, most students could do both in 1 day. They're actually pretty short. They cover concepts that your student would previously have learned and will be needed as they expand their knowledge in this new area. So again, these serve as important review, but also as a way of orienting your student to this new topic. All right. All the units have an end-of-unit assessment that wraps up and reinforces what was learned. And again, there's a part A and a part B, and I've scheduled them over 2 school days, but you could easily combine them into one if you're running behind schedule that week. All right, and finally, some units, I think the first unit for 6th grade in particular, has a mid-unit assessment, which is, again, an excellent opportunity to pause and practice what was learned. Also, a 2-part assessment, and you can use that same judgment in terms of scheduling it over 1 or 2 school days. Okay? Now, the assessments for or the answers for all the assessments for a unit are actually located in the back of the teacher's guide, and they are also located in a separate file in the teacher resources subfolder. All right, so that's it for this video. Next up is the last video, thankfully, right? That's video number 4. I'm going to take you on a detailed tour of an example lesson, and we'll look carefully at each part of how a lesson flows each school day, right? So you can be comfortable sitting down and teaching your student. But that's it for now, so I'll see you in a few minutes in video number 4.